The crystal chandeliers of Preston Manor cast cold light across Marcus Wellington's pristine suit as he carried his infant daughter down the winding stairs to the basement, her desperate cries echoing through the empty halls. 14-year-old David, whose mother cleaned the sprawling estate, pressed himself against the shadows of the service corridor, his heart pounding as he watched the billionaire place a small key into his pocket, the same key that would now lock away a child, whose only crime was being born with Down syndrome, instead of meeting her father's demands for perfection. For 3 days, David would hear those muffled cries during his after-school work hours, each whimper cutting deeper into his soul until a discovery in his mother's cleaning cart would give him the courage to do what the adults in this mansion of privilege had failed to do. But how could a teenage janitor's son outsmart one of Boston's most powerful men and expose a secret that would shake the city's elite to its core? Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of everyday heroes who prove that courage knows no social class, and type justice in the comments if you believe every child deserves a voice. David had learned the art of invisibility long before he witnessed Marcus Wellington's cruelty. 3 years of working alongside his mother in Preston Manor had taught him how to move through the sprawling estate's corridors like a shadow, how to fade into backgrounds, how to see without being seen. The wealthy never really looked at the people who cleaned their spaces. This was his first lesson in survival among Boston's elite. Every afternoon after school, he would take the staff entrance through the kitchen, change into the uniform that marked him as part of the Manor's invisible workforce, and begin his duties. The other staff members had grown used to his presence, this quiet teenager who seemed older than his 14 years. "You're too serious, Mijito," Rosa from the kitchen would tell him, sometimes slipping him extra cookies from the day's baking. "A boy your age should be playing football, not working in this cold place." But David knew better. His mother's salary alone barely covered their tiny apartment's rent, and her back had been getting worse lately. The fresh surgical scar from her latest disc operation was a constant reminder of why he needed to help. They were lucky to have these jobs. That's what everyone said. Lucky to serve in one of Boston's most prestigious households. Marcus Wellington's face appeared regularly in the business sections of newspapers left scattered around the manor. Tech visionary, they called him, philanthropist, Boston's most eligible widower. The articles never mentioned his newborn daughter, Grace. In fact, until 3 days ago, David hadn't even known she existed. He remembered the first time he'd heard her cry a week earlier. The sound had drifted through the manor's ventilation system while he was cleaning the library. At first, he'd thought he was imagining things. In the year since Mrs. Wellington had died in childbirth, the manor had never heard a baby's cry. "Did you know Mr. Wellington had a baby?" he'd asked his mother that evening. Maria's face had tightened almost imperceptibly as she stirred their dinner. "We don't ask questions, mijo. You know that. Questions cost jobs, and we can't afford to lose these jobs." But now, as David polished the Baroque mirrors in the main hall, those cries echoed in his memory. He watched Wellington's reflection glide past him without a glance, the man's Italian shoes clicking against marble floors. How many times had the billionaire walked past him, never seeing him, never imagining that this invisible boy would become witness to his darkest secret? The basement key burned in David's mind. He knew its twin was in his mother's cleaning cart. All the staff keys had duplicates for emergencies. That knowledge sat heavy in his chest, a responsibility he hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. Between tasks, he found himself drawn to the basement door. The heavy oak barrier stood like a monument to silence, to secrets kept by wealth and power. Sometimes, if he pressed his ear against the wood, he could hear soft whimpers. Once he heard Wellington's voice, cold and clinical. "It's better this way. The world has no place for imperfection." David thought of his own father, who had walked away when David was 5, unable to handle a wife with chronic health problems. He thought of the way his mother had fought to keep them alive, to keep them together, to give him a chance at education. Despite everything. "You're not invisible," she would tell him every morning. No matter what they think, no matter how they look past you, you see things they don't want seen. That's not a curse, mijo. That's a gift. Now as he wiped fingerprints from the manor's endless windows, David understood what she meant. He saw the way Wellington's smile never reached his eyes. He saw how the other staff members averted their gazes whenever the basement door was mentioned. He saw the careful choreography of privilege and power that kept secrets buried. A baby's muffled cry drifted up through the floorboards, and David's hand tightened on his cleaning cloth. In the polished window, his reflection stared back at him, a slim teenager in a uniform too big for his frame, dark eyes carrying a weight too heavy for his years. Somebody has to do something, he whispered to his reflection. But in Preston Manor, doing something meant risking everything. And for a boy whose whole life balanced on the edge of poverty, whose mother's health hung by the thread of employer-provided insurance, the cost of courage seemed impossibly high. The morning newspapers painted Marcus Wellington as Boston's golden son. His latest tech venture had just secured another $1 billion in funding, and his charitable foundation had announced a new initiative for gifted children. David read the article. During his breakfast break in the manor's kitchen, the irony turning his toast to ash in his mouth. "Look at this," he muttered to Rosa, who was preparing Wellington's morning smoothie. "He's donating millions to help exceptional young minds reach their full potential." Rosa's hand stilled momentarily on the blender. Sometimes the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. "Mijito?" She glanced around before lowering her voice. "Have you noticed? No birth announcement, no pictures. Every other CEO's baby gets a spread in the society pages, but is—" The question hung in the air, dangerous as a loose electrical wire. David thought of Grace, hidden away beneath their feet. He'd learned her name yesterday, overhearing a hushed conversation between Wellington and his private doctor. "She's perfectly healthy," the doctor had said, his voice carrying through the ventilation shaft. "The Down syndrome presents no life-threatening complications. With proper care—" "I didn't pay for your discretion to hear lectures about care," Wellington had cut him off. "The arrangements are made. In 6 months, she'll be transferred to a private facility in Switzerland. The press release will say she died of complications. The Wellington line remains unblemished." David had never heard such cold calculation in a human voice. It reminded him of the documentation he'd seen on his school computer about the Holocaust, the clinical way evil could be discussed as if it were just business. The manor's morning routine unfolded around him like a perfectly choreographed dance. Staff members moved through their tasks with practiced precision, eyes down, voices hushed. In the grand foyer, Wellington's housekeeper supervised the arrangement of fresh flowers. White lilies, always white lilies, since Mrs. Wellington's death. "David," she called out, "the third-floor windows need attention. And remember, stay out of Mr. Wellington's sight when he has his morning calls," David finished. He knew the rules: invisible unless needed, silent unless spoken to. As he climbed the service stairs to the third floor, his mother passed him, carrying fresh linens. Her limp was more pronounced today, but her eyes held a warning: keep your head down, do your job, survive. But survival had taken on a new meaning since he'd witnessed Grace's imprisonment. Each window he cleaned became a mirror, reflecting his own cowardice. Each crystal he polished held the reality of his complicity. Every minute of silence was a choice. From his position on the third floor, David could see Wellington in his garden office, conducting a video interview with a major tech magazine. The billionaire's media smile was perfect, practiced, poisonous. "My latest initiative focuses on nurturing excellence," Wellington's voice carried through the partially open window. "In today's world, there's no room for, let's say, less than optimal outcomes. Success requires perfection." David's cleaning cloth squeaked against the glass. Below, in the garden, a photographer captured Wellington's carefully curated image: the grieving widower, the visionary leader, the philanthropist. No one looked up to see the teenager watching from above. No one noticed his hands trembling. with the weight of truth. A soft cry echoed through the heating vent, so faint only someone listening for it would hear. David pressed his ear to the vent, his heart aching at the weakness in Grace's voice. 3 days without proper care, without enough human contact. He knew from his research that babies with Down syndrome often had specific medical needs. What was this isolation doing to her? His phone felt heavy in his pocket. It would be so easy to record the cries, to capture Wellington's conversations, to expose everything. But then what? His mother would lose her job, her insurance, possibly face legal action for his trespassing. They'd end up on the street, or worse. And would anyone even believe him? A cleaning boy accusing one of Boston's most powerful men? The sound of Wellington ending his interview drifted up. "Remember," the billionaire said to the reporter, "my life's work is about legacy, about ensuring the next generation reaches its highest potential." David's reflection stared back at him from the freshly cleaned window, and suddenly his mother's words took on new meaning. "You see things they don't want seen. That's not a curse, mijo. That's a gift." A plan began to form in his mind. Not a child's fantasy of justice, but something careful, calculated, considering every angle. He would need help, would need evidence, would need to be smarter than the smart people, more careful than the careful people. Most of all, he would need courage, not the bright, shining courage of heroes in movies, but the quiet, grinding courage of those who had nothing left to lose except their own humanity. From the basement, Grace's cry echoed again, weaker now. Time was running out. David looked once more at Wellington in his garden, at the photographer capturing the billionaire's practiced smile, at the perfectly maintained facade of Preston Manor. "Hold on," he whispered into the vent, hoping somehow Grace could hear him. "Hold on. Someone sees you. Someone knows." The Manor's shadows lengthened as morning turned to afternoon, but for the first time since witnessing Grace's imprisonment, David stood a little straighter. He was invisible, yes, but invisibility could be a weapon as well as a curse, and he was about to prove it. The discovery came by accident, though later David would wonder if fate had played a hand. His mother's cleaning cart had tipped while he was helping her navigate a tight corner, spilling its contents across the marble floor. As they scrambled to collect everything before anyone noticed, his hand closed around a small brass key. "Mama?" he whispered, recognizing its shape immediately. "This is—" Maria snatched it from his hand, her eyes darting nervously to the security cameras. "We don't talk about such things, mijo. Every staff cart has spares, for emergencies only. That's all you need to know." But David had already memorized its form, its weight, the slight tarnish on its brass surface, identical to the one Wellington had slipped into his pocket after locking his daughter away. His hands trembled as he helped right the cart, mind racing with possibilities and fears. That evening, as they rode the bus home to their small apartment in Dorchester, David watched his mother's face in the grimy window's reflection. The lines around her eyes had deepened since her surgery, and her hands never quite stopped shaking from the pain medication she couldn't afford to take as prescribed. "Tell me about my father again," he said suddenly. "The real story, not the nice version." Maria's reflection flinched. "Why do you want to hear about that man now?" "Please, Mama, I need to understand something," she sighed, her voice dropping to match the bus engine's hum. "Your father, he was a proud man. Too proud to accept a wife who got sick, a life that wasn't perfect. When the doctors diagnosed my back problems, he said he hadn't signed up for damaged goods." Her bitter laugh fogged the window. 2 weeks later, he was gone. No goodbye, no support, nothing, just gone. David thought of Grace, locked away because she didn't meet her father's standards of perfection. And if you had known before, would you have done anything differently, mijo? His mother turned to face him directly. "What's really troubling you?" The bus lurched to a stop, and David watched a young mother struggling up the steps with a baby in her arms. The infant's happy gurgle cut through the evening noise like a knife through his conscience. "Nothing," he said, "just thinking." But that night, sleep refused to come. His small bedroom, with its view of brick walls and fire escapes, felt like a prison of its own. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Grace's weakening cries. Every time he drifted off, he saw Wellington's cold smile in his dreams. Around midnight, he opened his laptop, careful not to wake his mother. His fingers moved across the keyboard, searching Down syndrome babies care requirements, child neglect laws, Massachusetts, whistleblower protection minors. The screen's blue light illuminated harsh truths. Grace needed special care, regular feeding schedules, human contact. 3 days in a basement could already be causing damage. The 6 months Wellington planned could be fatal, but the laws seemed written to protect the powerful. Whistleblower protection didn't extend to undocumented workers' children. His mother's immigration status was still pending, their lives balanced on the edge of deportation. One wrong move, David thought of his father walking away, of how that abandonment had shaped his entire life. He thought of his mother's determination to give him a chance at education despite everything. "You see things they don't want seen," she always said. The laptop's clock ticked past 1 a.m. when David made his decision. He couldn't walk away, couldn't be like his father choosing the easy path, but he also couldn't risk his mother's safety. With rash action, he opened a new document and began to type, mapping out everything he knew about Preston Manor, security patterns, staff schedules, camera locations. If he was going to do this, he would have to be smarter than he'd ever been. A baby's cry echoed in his memory as his fingers moved across the keyboard. Not Grace's cry from the basement, but his own from years ago. On the night his father left, his mother had told him later how the neighbors had heard him crying but done nothing, said nothing, chosen not to get involved. Sometimes, Maria had told him, God puts us in places to be someone else's miracle. The question is whether we're brave enough to answer that call. Dawn was breaking over Boston when David finally closed his laptop. In a few hours, he would return to Preston Manor, to his invisible role in the mansion's daily theater. But something had changed. The key he'd seen in his mother's cart was no longer just a spare for emergencies. It was a challenge, a test, a chance to be the person his father had failed to be. He touched the small cross his mother had given him for his 13th birthday. "Please," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was praying to God or to his own courage, "help me be strong enough. Help me be smart enough. Help me save her." The morning light painted his bedroom wall gold, and somewhere in Preston Manor, another day of secrets and silence was beginning. But this day would be different. This day, someone was watching, someone was planning, someone was refusing to walk away. Preston Manor's basement was a maze of corridors that had evolved over the mansion's century-and-a-half existence. David spent his lunch break studying the service tunnels, pretending to clean while mentally mapping every turn, every doorway, every potential escape route. The original wine cellar had been converted into storage rooms during Prohibition, and newer sections had been added for modern utilities. "You're down here a lot lately," observed Mr. Chen, the elderly maintenance manager who'd worked in the manor for 30 years. His eyes, sharp despite his age, followed David's movements. "Just being thorough," David replied, careful to keep his voice casual. "Mom always says corners get forgotten in big houses." Chen nodded slowly. "Corners hide many things, like that." Security camera. He pointed to a seemingly blank wall, hidden in the old vent. Wellington had it installed last month. Very expensive, very secret. David's heart skipped. Was the old man warning him or threatening him? But Chen simply shuffled away, humming tunelessly. Only later would David realize he'd been given crucial information. The basement's layout began to take shape in David's notebook, disguised as classroom doodles. Air vents marked in blue, electrical panels in red, camera blind spots in green. Grace's prison was in the newest section, added just last year during Wellington's renovation project. He learned the guards' patterns too. 2 men, ex-military, according to Rosa, who patrolled in predictable shifts. They were thorough but bored, their attention focused more on their phones than their surroundings. Every day at 3:15 they'd meet. In the security office for a coffee break that stretched to 20 minutes. The cameras were trickier. Most were obvious, their red lights blinking watchfully, but others, like the one Chen had pointed out, were hidden. David started staying late after his shift, offering to help his mother with extra cleaning. Really, he was watching the security monitors' reflections in the polished marble walls, counting cameras, noting their angles. "You're up to something," Rosa confronted him in the kitchen one morning. "I see you watching, planning. Whatever it is, be careful. Wellington, he destroys people who cross him." David turned to face her. "Did you know about the baby? About Grace?" Rosa's face tightened. "We all know things we pretend not to know. It's how we keep our jobs. It's how we become part of it," David countered softly. "Part of the evil." The word hung between them like smoke. Rosa crossed herself quickly. "You're just a boy. What can you do against someone like him?" But her question sparked an idea. Everyone saw him as just a boy, underestimated him, looked past him. Even the guards had stopped checking his cleaning cart, assuming it contained only supplies. That invisibility could be his greatest weapon. He began timing his movements through the basement. 3 minutes from the service elevator to Grace's door. 2 minutes back to the main corridor. 4 minutes to the nearest exit. Every second counted. Every detail mattered. The key itself presented another challenge. His mother's cart was never unattended long enough to borrow the spare. But David noticed something. When Wellington visited Grace, which he did precisely twice a day, he always used the same pocket for the key. And his jacket, his perfectly pressed jacket, always went to the same closet. "A man of habits," Chen Ti observed one day, catching David studying Wellington's routine. "Rich men often are. They think patterns make them strong. Really, patterns make them predictable." The old man's words carried weight. Wellington's entire life ran on precise schedules. Breakfast at 7 a.m., calls from 8 to 10, Grace's checks at 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. Every movement choreographed, every action timed. Even his cruelty followed a schedule. David learned to track Wellington's movements by sound. Italian shoes on marble, elevator hum, basement doors creak. Each noise built a timeline, a map of opportunities. Between Wellington's morning check and his first round of calls, there was a 12-minute window when the jacket hung unattended. The security office had a blind spot, a small corner where the camera's angles didn't quite meet. David discovered it while cleaning baseboards, marked it carefully in his notes. 3 minutes in that spot would be enough to duplicate a key if he had the right materials. His mother found his classroom sketches one evening. "Architecture homework?" she asked. But her eyes said she knew better. "Something like that," David answered. She stared at him long and hard before pulling him into a fierce hug. "Whatever. You're planning," she whispered. "Remember, sometimes courage isn't about fighting. Sometimes it's about knowing when to walk away." But David couldn't walk away, not now. Not with Grace's cries growing weaker each day, not with Wellington's smug face appearing in more newspapers, promoting his charity work, while his own daughters suffered in darkness. The final piece clicked when he overheard Wellington's phone call about the Swiss facility. 6 months until Grace would disappear forever. The timeline was set. David had to act soon, had to be perfect in his planning, because he would only get one chance. And if he failed, if he was caught, it wouldn't just be his future at stake. His mother's job, her immigration status, their entire life balanced on his next moves. The weight of it should have crushed him, but instead it crystallized his resolve. In his pocket, he carried a small piece of modeling clay, borrowed from the art room at school. Perfect for taking key impressions, according to YouTube tutorials he'd watched late at night. All he needed was 3 minutes with Wellington's key. 3 minutes to start a chain of events that would either save Grace or destroy everything he and his mother had worked for. The manor's shadows lengthened as evening approached, and David checked his notebook one final time. Tomorrow would be the day. Tomorrow he would stop planning and start acting. Tomorrow he would discover if being invisible made him powerless or invincible. The clay impression worked perfectly. David's hands trembled as he pressed the newly cut key into the basement door's lock, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure the security cameras must be able to hear it. The mechanism turned with a soft click that seemed to echo through the empty corridor. 3 minutes. That's all he had during the guard's coffee break. 3 minutes to make first contact, to assess Grace's condition, to begin whatever rescue he was foolishly attempting. The basement air felt thick with decades of secrets as he moved silently through the shadows. Grace's room was at the end of the northern corridor. No cameras inside. Wellington was too careful to leave evidence of his cruelty, but a small ventilation panel offered enough light to navigate by. David's flashlight beam revealed what wealth and power had tried to hide. The room was clinically clean but sparse. A hospital-grade crib stood against one wall, its metal bars gleaming coldly. Grace lay there, tiny in her white onesie, her eyes wide and alert despite her circumstances. When she saw David, something remarkable happened. She smiled. "Hey there," he whispered, his voice catching. Up close, he could see her features clearly, the slightly flattened facial profile typical of Down syndrome, the beautiful almond-shaped eyes, the perfect tiny fingers that reached toward him. "I'm here to help you." Grace made a soft cooing sound, so different from her earlier cries of distress. David checked his phone's timer. 2 minutes left. He quickly documented the room with his camera, noting the feeding schedule on the wall, the minimal supplies, the lack of toys or comfort items. "This is wrong," he murmured, reaching through the crib bars to let Grace grip his finger. Her hold was strong, vital, defying her father's determination to see her as less than perfect. "You deserve so much better than this." A noise in the corridor sent his heart racing, but it was just the building's old pipes groaning. 1 minute left. He couldn't leave her like this, couldn't walk away now that he'd seen her face. Quickly, he pulled the small stuffed rabbit from his pocket, purchased with his lunch money from a street vendor near school. "Something to keep you company," he whispered, tucking it beside her. "I'll be back, I promise." Grace hugged the rabbit immediately, as if she'd been waiting her whole short life for something soft to hold. The sight burned itself into David's memory, this tiny fighter dismissed as imperfect, showing more humanity than the powerful man who had imprisoned her. He made it back to the service area just as the guards returned from their break, his heart still racing, his mind forever changed. Numbers and plans were one thing. Looking into Grace's eyes, seeing her smile, feeling her grip his finger, that made everything real in a way no amount of planning could have prepared him for. That night, he couldn't sleep. His phone's camera roll held the evidence of Wellington's cruelty, the stark room, the minimal care instructions, the logs showing barely adequate feeding schedules. But it also held something else, a short video of Grace smiling at the rabbit, her face glowing with a joy that denied every assumption her father had made about her worth. "I saw her today," he typed in a draft email he'd never send. "I saw her, and she saw me, and nothing about her is wrong or imperfect or unworthy. The only imperfection is in the hearts of those who would lock her away." The next morning, his mother noticed the change in him. "You look different," she said, as they rode the bus to work. "Like you're carrying something heavy." "Just thinking about Dad," David replied, which wasn't entirely a lie. "About choices people make, about what makes someone a real parent." Maria studied his face. "Sometimes the hardest choices are between what is safe and what is right. And how do you know which is which?" She touched the cross at her neck, the twin of the one David wore. "Your heart knows. Even when your mind is afraid, your heart knows the right path." At the manor, David moved through his morning tasks in a daze, hyper-aware of the new key's weight in his pocket. Every time he passed the basement door, he thought of Grace holding that rabbit. Every time he saw Wellington stride past in his expensive suits, he imagined Grace's tiny fingers gripping his own. During his lunch break, he researched more about Down syndrome on his phone, learning about the special care these children needed, about their capacity for love and achievement when given the chance. The contrast between what was possible and what Grace was experiencing made his hands shake with anger. Rosa caught him crying in the kitchen storage room, surrounded by cleaning supplies. She didn't ask questions, just handed him a tissue and stood guard at the door until he composed himself. "The rabbit was a good idea," she said quietly before leaving. "Everyone needs something to hold on to in the dark." David stared at her retreating back, realizing that nothing in Preston Manor went completely unnoticed. The question was, who could he trust? Who would help him save Grace? And who would protect Wellington's dark secret? As if in answer, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Storage room, midnight, come alone. Some corners hide. Friends, not just cameras." The message was signed with a simple character, Chen Chen, the old maintenance manager. David looked at his carefully drawn basement maps, his documented security patterns, his photos of Grace's prison. He had evidence now, and maybe an ally. But he also had something more dangerous than any of these. He had a promise to keep too. A little girl whose smile had changed everything. 3 minutes in that basement room had transformed his mission from an abstract plan to a moral imperative. Grace wasn't just a cause anymore. She was real, she was fighting, and she needed him. To be as brave as she was. The storage room at midnight felt like another world. David navigated between shelves of cleaning supplies using his phone's flashlight, the beam catching dust motes that danced like stars in the darkness. Chen materialized from the shadows so quietly that David nearly dropped his phone. "You are either very brave or very foolish," the old man said softly. "Perhaps both. Show me what you have." David pulled out his phone, hands shaking slightly as he displayed the photos and videos. Chen's weathered face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened on his maintenance clipboard as he swiped through the evidence. "I was here when Mrs. Wellington died," Chen said finally. "In childbirth, they told everyone. But I heard things. The doctor saying the baby had Down syndrome. Wellington shouting about genetic testing that should have prevented this. Then silence. Always silence in this house. Help me," David pleaded. "I can't do this alone." Chen's eyes, sharp despite his age, studied David's face. "What makes you think I haven't tried? Others have noticed. Others have spoken up. They disappear. Jobs lost, reputations ruined, worse. Wellington's power reaches far. But you're still here." A ghost of a smile crossed Chen's face. "I'm old, patient. I watch. I wait. Like you, I keep maps." He opened his clipboard, revealing detailed maintenance logs that were actually surveillance records. Years of Wellington's movements, habits, violations. "But this," he tapped David's phone, "this is what we needed. Proof." For the next hour, they compared notes. Chen's knowledge of the manor's infrastructure was encyclopedic. He pointed out maintenance tunnels David hadn't known existed, security system blind spots, potential escape routes. "The guards change shifts at midnight on Sundays," Chen explained. 3 minutes when the cameras loop old footage while systems reset. "Wellington thinks no one knows this. He is wrong." David added this to his notes, then hesitated. "Mr. Chen, why are you helping me?" The old man was quiet for a long moment. "I had a sister like Grace in China many years ago. Our parents loved her, protected her. She brought joy to everyone she met. But others," he shook his head, "others saw only what they wanted to see, like Wellington." Movement at the door made them both freeze, but it was only Rosa. She slipped in silently, carrying something wrapped in a kitchen towel. "Evidence," she whispered, unwrapping a stack of papers. "Wellington's private food orders for the basement. Baby formula, but only half what a child her age needs. Minimal supplies. I've been documenting everything." David stared at her. "You knew? All this time?" "We all knew, Mijito. We were all just waiting for someone brave enough to act, or foolish enough." She smiled sadly. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Chen studied the food orders. "This is good, shows pattern of neglect. But we need more. Medical records, proof of his plans for Switzerland." "I can get into his office," David said. During his morning calls, he never closes his door fully, too busy performing for his video conferences to notice a cleaning boy. Rosa shook her head. Too dangerous. If he catches you, if we don't stop him, Grace dies. David cut her off. Maybe not directly, but that basement, those feeding schedules, it's killing her slowly. And if he sends her to Switzerland, they all knew what that meant. International borders would make rescue impossible. Their window of opportunity was closing. Tomorrow, Chen decided. Wellington has a board meeting downtown. His office will be empty all afternoon. I can disable the cameras for maintenance checks. Standard procedure, no suspicion. And I'll keep the guards busy with a small kitchen crisis, Rosa added. Something smoky enough to draw attention, but not dangerous. David looked between them, these unlikely allies who had been watching, waiting, gathering evidence, while maintaining their facade of servile invisibility. Why didn't you do this before? Together you could have... We needed someone like you, Chen said simply. Young enough to be underestimated, smart enough to be careful, brave enough to act. Sometimes the right person must arrive before justice can be done. They spent another hour planning, synchronizing their roles, accounting for every variable. When David finally crept back to the service elevator, his head was spinning with details and contingencies, but as he passed the basement door, a soft sound made him pause. Grace was crying again, but differently now. Not the desperate sobs of abandonment, but the simple call of a baby seeking comfort. He pressed his hand against the door, wishing he could do more tonight. Soon, he whispered. Hold on just a little longer. The rabbit he'd given her had been a risk. If Wellington saw it, questions would be asked. But Chen had assured him it was safe. Wellington never touches her during checks, signs the log, visual inspection only. His disgust protects your secret. Dawn was approaching as David finally left the manor. On the early bus home, he updated his notes one final time. Tomorrow would change everything. They would have one chance to gather enough evidence to force action, to prove Wellington's crimes in a way that even his money and power couldn't hide. Rosa's last words stayed with him. Remember, Mijito, in this world there are two kinds of people, those who turn away from evil and those who stay to fight it. Tomorrow we fight. The local police station looked impossibly large from the bottom of its stone steps. David had skipped school to be here, his phone loaded with carefully selected evidence. Not everything, he wasn't that naive, but enough to demand attention. Beside him, his school counselor, Ms. Martinez, squeezed his shoulders supportively. He'd gone to her first, knowing he needed an adult authority figure to be taken seriously. She'd listened to his story without interruption, watched the videos with growing horror, and immediately offered to accompany him to the police. Remember, she said now, stay calm, stick to the facts. Let me do most of the talking at first. But the detective assigned to hear them out barely glanced at the photos. Marcus Wellington? He laughed, actually laughed. Do you know how many donations he makes to the police foundation? His company developed half our security software. Sir, Ms. Martinez tried, we have evidence. You have pictures of a private nursery and some cleaning records. The detective cut her off. Mr. Wellington is a widower who recently lost his wife in childbirth. If he chooses to keep his grieving private, that's his right. David's hands clenched around his phone. But the basement, the feeding schedules, above my pay grade, kid, the detective stood, clearly dismissing them. Word of advice? Cleaning staff should clean. Leave the parenting to parents. Outside, David kicked a trash can in frustration, earning disapproving looks from passing pedestrians. Ms. Martinez watched him with understanding. System's rigged, he spat. They're all bought and paid for. Not everyone, she said thoughtfully. My sister works for the Boston Globe. She specializes in investigative reporting. David shook his head. Wellington owns half the papers, a stock. Chen checked. True, but she also freelances for ProPublica. At David's blank look, she explained, independent news organization, specializes in exposing corruption. They might be very interested in a tech billionaire hiding his disabled daughter while promoting children's charities. Hope flickered, But David remembered his mother's precarious immigration status. If we go public, everyone involved could lose everything. Sometimes, Ms. Martinez said softly, that's the price of doing the right thing. Back at Preston Manor, David found a note taped inside his locker. Rosa's handwriting, "Kitchen now." His heart racing, he made his way there, finding not just Rosa, but a small group of staff members waiting. "Tell them," Rosa commanded. "Tell them everything." For the next 15 minutes, David explained what he'd discovered, what he and Chen and Rosa had documented. When he finished, the Manor's chef, a burly man named Tony, spoke first. "I wondered why the baby formula orders were so small. Kept trying to add more to the shopping list, but orders always came back cut. The laundry's been wrong too," added Sarah from housekeeping. "Not enough changes of clothes, not enough bedding. I reported it twice. Got ignored." One by one, they shared their observations, their suspicions, their failed attempts to intervene. Each had seen pieces of Wellington's cruelty, but felt powerless to act alone. "Police won't help," David told them. "Not officially. Wellington's got too much influence." "Police aren't the only power in Boston," Tony said. His cousin, he explained, worked for Catholic Charities. They handle adoptions, advocate for children. They've got lawyers, connections with child services, and they answer to God, not Wellington's money, Rosa added, crossing herself. The group expanded their plans, each person offering resources, connections, ways to help. Sarah had a brother who drove delivery trucks, a potential escape route. Tony's cousin could have a safe house ready. Even the gardener had useful information about grounds security patterns. But it was Jenny from reception who provided the most valuable intel. "Wellington's planning a big charity gala here next week. Hundreds of guests, media coverage. The perfect time to expose everything, when all eyes are already on the Manor." David's mind raced with possibilities. He'll be focused on maintaining his public image. Security will be stretched thin, monitoring all the guests. And if something were to happen during his big speech about helping children, Rosa's eyes gleamed. They spent an hour coordinating roles, establishing signals, building redundancies into their plans. If one approach failed, another would be ready. The staff of Preston Manor had spent years being invisible, but now that invisibility became their strength. "One thing," Tony said as they prepared to disperse, "whatever happens, the kid comes first. Grace gets to safety, no matter what else." "Goes wrong, agreed?" Everyone nodded solemnly. They were risking their livelihoods, possibly their freedom, but the image of that baby alone in the basement steeled their resolve. As David headed home that evening, his phone buzzed with messages from his new allies, contact numbers for Catholic Charities, schedules for delivery trucks, building code violations Chen had documented. A coalition of the invisible was forming, drawing power from the very shadows Wellington had relegated them to. But passing the basement door, hearing Grace's soft noises, David felt the weight of responsibility crushing him. So many people now depended on his plan working. So many lives could be destroyed if he failed. "Almost there," he whispered to the door. "Hold on, Grace. Your army of angels is growing." The week before the gala transformed Preston Manor's hidden spaces into command centers of quiet rebellion. The wine cellar, normally off-limits to staff, became their primary meeting spot thanks to Chen's maintenance inspections. Every day brought new allies, new resources, new hope. Sister Margaret from Catholic Charities arrived under the guise of discussing wine donations for their annual fundraiser. Her sharp eyes took in every detail as Jenny gave her a tour, lingering significantly near the basement door. "Our organization has extensive experience with international adoptions," she said carefully, once they were in the privacy of the wine cellar, "including cases involving complicated jurisdictions. Switzerland, for instance." David watched her face as they showed her the evidence. Unlike the police detective, she absorbed every detail, asking precise questions about Grace's care, her development, her needs. The challenge, she explained, isn't just rescuing her, it's ensuring her long-term safety. Wellington's influence means she'll need immediate legal protection, medical documentation, possibly even a new identity. "Can you help with that?" David asked. The nun's smile was fierce. "Child, the church has been hiding people from powerful men since before this country existed. We have resources Mr. Wellington can't imagine." Tony's cousin Marco arrived next, driving his delivery truck on a wrong route that happened to pass the manor's service entrance. He studied the layout, timing potential escape routes to the second. Loading docks got cameras, he noted, but they don't cover the blind spot behind the dumpsters. "Get her there? I can have her to the safe house in 12 minutes. Already set up a nursery, got a pediatrician on standby." The pediatrician turned out to be Dr. Santos, who'd treated David after his bicycle accident last year. She provided a list of supplies Grace would need during and after the rescue. Specific formula brands, medications, monitoring equipment. "I've seen too many rich men try to hide imperfect children," she said bitterly. "Not this time, not this child." Even the guards proved unexpectedly helpful, though they didn't know it. David noticed how they paid more attention to their phones during night shifts, especially when certain games were playing. The upcoming gala coincided with a major playoff game, timing they could use. But it was Ms. Martinez's sister at ProPublica who provided the final piece. "We've been investigating Wellington's charitable foundation for months," she revealed, via secure video chat. "Money laundering, tax fraud, connections to that scandal in Jakarta. Your evidence about Grace could be the key to exposing everything." "How long would you need?" David asked. "Get us proof of Grace's condition, Wellington's plans for Switzerland, and the foundation's involvement. We can have the story ready to break during the gala. Maximum impact." The pieces were falling into place, but David felt the pressure mounting. Every new ally meant another person who could be hurt if things went wrong. Every planning session increased the risk of discovery. His mother noticed his distraction during dinner. "Mijo, whatever burden you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone." David looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the strength that had sustained them after his father left. The dignity that survived every humiliation of poverty and prejudice. "Mama, if you could have saved someone, even if it meant risking everything, would you?" Maria was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she reached into her purse and pulled out a worn passport. "I was wondering when you would tell me about Grace," she said softly. "Chen showed me everything yesterday, this passport. I've kept it ready since your father left. Sometimes safety isn't as important as doing what's right." David's eyes filled with tears. "But your immigration status, if we have to run, then we run?" She gripped his hand. "But we run knowing we gave that baby a chance at life, knowing we didn't turn away like your father did." The next day, final preparations accelerated. Sister Margaret delivered papers, establishing a chain of custody through Catholic charities. Dr. Santos prepared a mobile medical kit disguised as cleaning supplies. Marco's truck acquired diplomatic plates through channels no one questioned. Chen outdid himself, accidentally scheduling maintenance on key security systems during the gala. "Old equipment," he shrugged when Wellington complained. "Very unreliable, must be checked regularly." The staff practiced their roles between regular duties. Sarah mapped out every hiding spot along the escape route. Tony prepared special appetizers that would keep security occupied at strategic moments. Rosa modified her cleaning schedule to position her cart with emergency supplies. But it was Jenny's contribution that amazed everyone. "Wellington's speech," she announced during their evening meeting. "I type all his correspondence, remember?" The gala speech is all about his foundation's new initiative for exceptional children. He's literally going to be talking about helping kids like Grace while she's locked in his basement. Perfect timing for the story to break, Ms. Martinez's sister confirmed. The contrast will be impossible to ignore. David added each new detail to his plans, but his thoughts kept returning to Grace. During his brief visits, now supported by coordinated staff distractions, he'd watched her grow stronger, responding to the small kindnesses they managed to provide. The rabbit he'd given her never left her side. "Soon," he promised her during each visit, "soon you'll have a whole world of people to love you." Grace's smile, bright despite her imprisonment, became their beacon. Every person in their growing network had seen her photo, heard her story. committed themselves to her rescue. In trying to hide her, Wellington had inadvertently created something powerful, a community united by compassion, drawn together by the need to protect one vulnerable child. The gala was 3 days away. Their army of angels was ready. The only question remaining was, would it be enough to overcome the power of one of Boston's most influential men? The day before the gala, Wellington's perfectionism reached new heights. He stalked the manor's corridors like a general inspecting troops, finding fault with everything. The flower arrangements weren't precise enough. The crystal wasn't polished to his standards. Every criticism carried an underlying tension, the pressure of maintaining his public image, while his darkest secret lay just below their feet. Everything must be perfect, he snapped at Jenny, reviewing the guest list for the 10th time. The mayor's coming, 3 state senators, the BBC's doing a feature on the foundation, one mistake, and David, dusting the library shelves, noted how Wellington's right hand kept straying to his pocket, the one holding the basement key. The billionaire's carefully constructed world was balanced on a knife's edge, though he didn't know it yet. "Chen," Wellington's voice cracked like a whip. "These security cameras, why are they scheduled for maintenance during the gala?" The old maintenance manager bowed slightly, his demeanor perfectly subservient. "Annual system check, sir. Cannot change. Union rules, very strict about safety protocols." "Union rules? I own the union." Wellington's mask slipped for a moment, revealing the rage beneath. Then he caught himself, straightening his tie. "Fine, just make it quick. I want everything working when the press arrives." "Of course, sir." Chen's face remained impassive, betraying nothing of the real plans for those cameras. The staff moved through their preparations with careful precision, each person playing their role in the approaching drama. Tony stress-tested the kitchen equipment, ensuring the smoke problem would appear natural when needed. Sarah stocked the linen closets along the escape route with emergency supplies disguised as cleaning materials. But it was Rosa who noticed something wrong. During her afternoon shift, she caught Wellington speaking quietly into his phone near the basement door. "Double the security tomorrow. Something feels off. And send someone to check the Swiss facility again. Make sure everything's ready early. We might need to move up the timeline." She signaled David with their prearranged sign, 3 taps of her cleaning cart against the baseboard. When they could safely meet in the storage room, her face was grave. "He suspects something," she whispered. "He's pushing up Grace's transfer. It might not be 6 months anymore." David's heart raced. How soon? He didn't say, but he spooked, adding more security for tomorrow too. This changed everything. Their carefully orchestrated plan assumed normal security levels, normal staffing patterns. Extra guards could destroy their timing, block their escape routes. "We need to tell the others," David started, but Rosa grabbed his arm. "There's more. I saw him checking flight plans on his computer. Private jet on standby at Logan. If he gets Grace to that plane," they both knew what that meant. Once across international borders, Grace would disappear forever. No amount of evidence or media exposure would bring her back. David's phone buzzed. A message from Sister Margaret. "Safe house ready. Medical team on standby. God's timing is always perfect." But was it? Everything they'd planned suddenly felt inadequate. What if Wellington moved Grace before the gala? What if the extra security discovered their preparations? What if— "Stop," Rosa said firmly, seeing the panic in his eyes. "Remember what Chen says? Fear makes people sloppy. We stay calm, we adjust, we think." She was right. David forced himself to breathe slowly, to think strategically, like Chen had taught him. Extra security meant more people to watch, more chances for someone to make mistakes. And Wellington's paranoia could work against him. Nervous people slip up, reveal things they shouldn't. "We need to move some things up," he said finally. "Get everyone in position earlier than planned. And we need a backup plan in case he tries to move her before the gala." Rosa nodded. "I'll tell Tony to have the kitchen incident ready to go at any time. Sarah can pre-position the emergency supplies tonight instead of tomorrow. Tell Chen about the extra security. He'll need to adjust the camera loops. And Jenny should move the guest list adjustment earlier. Make sure those security additions get confused about their assignments. They spent the next hour revising signals, updating timetables, adding redundancies to their plans. Every change had to be communicated carefully, passed through their network of allies without raising suspicion. David made one final visit to Grace that evening, using the last of the day's regular cleaning rounds as cover. She was awake, clutching the rabbit he'd given her, her eyes bright with an intelligence that defied her father's dismissal of her worth. "Tomorrow," he whispered through the vent. "No matter what, tomorrow you'll be free." Grace smiled at the sound of his voice, reaching toward the vent with tiny fingers. Even in the basement's dim light, David could see she was developing well, despite her circumstances, another piece of evidence against Wellington's claims about her limitations. His phone buzzed again, Ms. Martinez's sister. Story ready to go, multiple outlets standing by. Once we have final confirmation of Grace's condition, everything breaks wide open. David touched the vent one last time before heading upstairs. In less than 24 hours, their plan would either save Grace and expose Wellington's crimes to the world, or he couldn't think about the or. Couldn't think about what failure would mean for Grace, for his mother, for everyone who had risked everything to help. In the manner above, Wellington's preparations for his moment of philanthropic glory continued. But in the shadows and service corridors, a different kind of preparation was underway. Their army of angels was ready, their plans were set, and tomorrow would decide everything. David's last thought before leaving the manor was of Grace's smile, of her reaching through the vent toward the sound of his voice. No matter what Wellington added to his security, no matter how he tried to protect his secrets, that smile had already defeated him. He just didn't know it yet. The night of the gala arrived with a mix of rain and fog that seemed fitting for their mission. David watched from the service entrance as Boston's elite arrived in their luxury cars, each guest another piece in Wellington's carefully orchestrated show of philanthropy. The basement key felt heavy in his pocket as he adjusted his borrowed waiter's uniform. "Remember," Tony whispered, as he handed David a tray of appetizers, "you're invisible until you're not. Use it." The grand ballroom sparkled with crystal and pretense. Television cameras captured Wellington greeting guests, his practiced smile never wavering. "Tonight," he told a BBC reporter, "we celebrate our foundation's commitment to helping every child reach their full potential." David's hands tightened on his serving tray. In his earpiece, courtesy of the catering company's new communication system, he could hear his team checking in. "Security shift change complete." 2 new guards confused about their posts. Jenny's voice was calm, professional. "Kitchen incident prepped and ready." Tony's confirmation. "Cameras switching to maintenance mode in sectors 3 through 6. Chen's steady report. "Medical team in position 2 blocks away." Sister Margaret's quiet assurance. "Escape route clear. Truck ready." Marco's final piece. David moved through the crowd like a ghost, noting faces, positions, patterns. The extra security Wellington had ordered was obvious, men in dark suits, trying too hard to look casual. But Jenny's manipulation of the duty roster had them checking the wrong areas, creating gaps in their coverage. Wellington took the stage at precisely 8 p.m., right on schedule. "Distinguished guests," he began, his voice carrying artificial warmth, "tonight we embark on a new mission." That was Tony's cue. Smoke began billowing from the kitchen, not enough to trigger evacuations, but sufficient to draw security's attention. Right on cue, several guards moved to investigate. Sectors 3 through 6 dark. Chen's voice in David's ear. "Maintenance loop running, 14 minutes until system reset." David slipped away from the ballroom, his heart pounding but his movement steady. The basement key, the real one this time, lifted from Wellington's jacket during the pre-gala chaos, felt like it was burning through his pocket. The service corridors were empty, everyone focused on the gala above. David reached the basement door, just as Sister Margaret's voice came through. "BBC reporter," moving into position. "Story goes live in 12 minutes. His hands trembled slightly as he inserted the key. This was the point of no return. Once he opened this door, there would be no going back, no maintaining the pretense of normal service. The lock clicked open. Grace was awake, as if she knew this night was different. When David reached her room, she was standing in her crib, clutching the rabbit, her face lighting up at his approach. "Time to go, Pequeña," he whispered, using Rosa's nickname for her. The baby bag they'd prepared was hidden behind cleaning. Supplies in the corner, formula, diapers, medical documents Dr. Santos had arranged. "First checkpoint clear," Sarah's voice came through his earpiece. "Window is open." David lifted Grace carefully, making sure the rabbit stayed with her. She snuggled into his chest immediately, trusting him completely. The weight of her in his arms made everything real in a new way. This wasn't just about exposing Wellington anymore. This was about saving a life. They moved through the basement according to their rehearsed route. Above, they could hear Wellington's speech continuing. "Every child deserves a chance to excel, to be seen, to be valued." 8 minutes to story break, came the update. BBC reporter asking about Foundation's screening processes. The service elevator was waiting, kept open by a maintenance issue Chen had arranged. David's pulse roared in his ears as they ascended to the ground floor. This was the riskiest part. They had to cross 20 feet of exposed corridor to reach the kitchen's back exit. "Kitchen clear," Tony confirmed. "Smoke issue keeping security occupied up front." David stepped out of the elevator, holding Grace. Close. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. "Wait," Rosa's urgent whisper. "New guard approaching from East Corridor." David froze. The guard's footsteps were getting closer. Grace, sensing his tension, started to fuss quietly. "Distraction needed at main entrance." David breathed into his mic. "Now." Jenny's voice came back instantly. "On it." Seconds later, they heard commotion from the front of the manor. Something about a suspicious package. The footsteps changed direction, moving away. "Clear," Rosa confirmed. They made it to the kitchen's back door. Marco's truck was idling exactly where it should be, hidden from security cameras by Chen's maintenance loop. 4 minutes to story break, Sister Margaret updated. Wellington's starting Foundation pledge drive. David reached for the door. Handle! Victory! So close he could taste it. That's when Grace let out a sharp cry, not loud, but clear in the relative quiet of the service area. And from behind them came the worst possible sound, Wellington's voice, cold and precise. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." David turned slowly. Wellington stood at the end of the corridor, flanked by 2 security guards who definitely weren't confused about their assignments. The billionaire's public mask had vanished, replaced by something much darker. "Did you really think," Wellington said softly, "that I wouldn't have my own surveillance, that I wouldn't notice the preparations, the extra communications, the convenient maintenance issues?" In David's ear, the team was scrambling, trying to adjust, but Wellington held up a radio of his own. "Oh, I've been listening to your little network all night. Quite impressive, really, but now it's over." Grace clutched David's shirt, whimpering softly. Wellington's eyes fell on her with naked disgust. "Give her to me," he commanded, "and perhaps we can discuss alternatives to calling the immigration authorities about your mother." Time seemed to freeze in the service corridor. David could hear the gala continuing above them, the clinking of glasses and murmur of wealthy voices, a surreal counterpoint to the tension below. Grace pressed closer to his chest, as if sensing the danger in her father's cold stare. 2 minutes to story break, Sister Margaret's voice whispered in his ear. But it didn't matter now. Wellington had them trapped. "Your mother's paperwork is quite irregular," Wellington continued, his voice precise and cutting. "1 phone call and she'll be deported within hours. Is that what you want? To destroy your family over this mistake?" David's arms tightened around Grace. "The only mistake," he said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice, "was thinking you could hide her forever. That money could bury the truth." "Truth?" Wellington laughed, the sound empty of warmth. "The truth is that I built an empire. The truth is that weakness cannot be allowed to taint strength. The truth is that your a child playing games with forces you can't understand. But something was happening behind Wellington. Shadows moved in the dimly lit corridor, kitchen staff, cleaning crew, maintenance workers. The invisible people Wellington had spent years looking through were silently gathering surrounding him. "You're wrong," David said, louder now. "The truth is that you've spent so long looking down on people, you forgot to watch your back." Wellington's smirk faltered as he finally sensed the presence of dozens of workers behind him. His security guards shifted uneasily, suddenly aware they were badly outnumbered. "This is absurd," Wellington snapped. "You're all fired, every one of you, and I'll make sure you never work in Boston again." "Go ahead." Rosa stepped forward, phone raised and recording. "Fire us. But first, explain to everyone why you locked your baby daughter in a basement. Explain the falsified medical records. Explain Switzerland." 30 seconds crackled through David's earpiece. Wellington's face contorted. "You think this changes anything? I own half this city. One phone call and—" He reached for his phone, but Chen materialized from the shadows, moving with unexpected speed for his age. The phone clattered to the floor. "You own nothing," the old man said softly. "Nothing that matters. Story breaking now," Sister Margaret announced. As if on cue, a commotion erupted above them. They could hear gasps, exclamations, the sudden chaos of Wellington's carefully orchestrated gala imploding. Jenny's voice carried down the stairs. "BBC breaking news. TAC billionaire imprisoned disabled daughter while promoting children's charities." The security guards looked at each other, then at their phones where notifications were flooding in. One of them quietly removed his earpiece and stepped back. "It's over," David said, feeling Grace relax in his arms as if she too understood the moment. "The whole world knows now." Wellington's mask shattered completely. He lunged forward, reaching for Grace, but found himself facing a wall of his own staff, gardeners, maids, cooks, cleaners, all standing firm between him and his daughter. "Get out of my way," he shouted. "I own you. I own this house. I own—" "You own nothing," David repeated Chen's words, "and you never understood that love is stronger than ownership." The service door burst open behind David. Sister Margaret entered, followed by Dr. Santos and 2 police officers. Not the corrupt ones Wellington owned, but state police acting on the evidence ProPublica had been gathering for months. "Marcus Wellington," the lead officer announced, "you're under arrest for child endangerment, medical neglect, conspiracy to commit immigration fraud." The list continued, but David was focused on Grace, who had started to cry softly. Dr. Santos quickly checked her over while Sister Margaret documented everything on video. "She needs immediate medical attention," the doctor declared, "but she's strong." "She's been fighting all along, haven't you, little one?" Wellington struggled as the officers cuffed him, his composure completely gone. "You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am? I'll destroy all of you." But his threats sounded hollow, now drowned out by the sound of more police entering the manor, by the media vans pulling up outside, by the shocked voices of gala guests discovering the truth about their host. "David," his mother's voice cut through the chaos. Maria emerged from the crowd of staff, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you, mijo. But your papers, your status," David started. Sister Margaret stepped forward. "Already?" "Handled. The church has arranged immediate humanitarian parole for your family with a clear path to citizenship. Your testimony against Wellington's trafficking operations makes you valuable witnesses." Grace reached out for Maria, who took her naturally, cradling her with the instinct of a true mother. The baby settled immediately, still clutching her. Rabbit finally safe in arms that would never reject her. The next hours passed in a blur of police statements, medical examinations, and media chaos. Wellington's empire began crumbling in real time as more evidence emerged, not just about Grace, but about years of corruption, exploitation, and abuse of power. But what David remembered most clearly was the moment they carried Grace out of Preston Manor for the last time. As they stepped into the night air, the rain had stopped and a patch of stars was visible through breaking clouds. "Look," Rosa whispered, pointing up. "Un arco iris de luna, a lunar rainbow, rare, beautiful, and perfect for this moment of justice and liberation." Grace laughed for the first time any of them could remember, reaching toward the lights of freedom with the pure joy of a child who knew finally and forever that she was loved. The first week after Grace's rescue transformed Boston's Children's Hospital into a center of both healing and investigation. The private wing where Grace received treatment became a careful balance of medical care and legal documentation, as every detail of her condition provided evidence against Wellington. David visited daily after school, often finding Grace surrounded by a rotating cast of her protectors. Rosa would sing Spanish lullabies while feeding her. Chen taught her simple finger games that made her laugh. Dr. Santos marveled at her rapid improvement once given proper care and attention. "She's extraordinary," the doctor told David one afternoon, showing him Grace's latest developmental charts. All that time in isolation, and she never stopped fighting, never stopped trying to connect. Her cognitive responses are well above what Wellington claimed in those falsified reports. The media storm continued to build. Wellington's arrest had opened floodgates of investigation into similar cases nationwide. Other wealthy families' hidden children were being discovered. Other corporate empires built on foundations of shame and secrets were crumbling. "You started something bigger than Grace," Sister Margaret explained, showing David news reports from across the country. "People are finally talking about how society treats children with disabilities, about the corruption that enables abuse, about the courage of those who stand up to power." The staff of Preston Manor had become minor celebrities in their own right, though most preferred to remain anonymous. Their story of collective resistance inspired labor organizers, social justice advocates, and workers' rights groups. The invisible people who had brought down a billionaire became symbols of hope. Maria's immigration status was expedited through channels that previously seemed impossibly blocked. Sometimes, the immigration officer told them, stamping her a permanent residence approval, "Justice needs a reminder that it works for the people, not the powerful." David found himself dealing with unexpected attention at school. Students who had never noticed him before suddenly wanted to hear the story firsthand, but it was Ms. Martinez who helped him navigate his new reality. "You're not just the boy who saved Grace anymore," she counseled. "You're proof that one person's courage can inspire others to find their own. That's a heavy responsibility, but also a gift." The investigation into Wellington's crimes expanded daily. Files recovered from his office revealed decades of manipulation, bribery, and exploitation. The basement wasn't just Grace's prison. It was a symbol of how wealth could hide cruelty behind respectable facades. "He'll never hurt another child," Detective Sarah Chen assured them. She had taken personal charge of the case after the corrupt local police were exposed. "We're finding evidence of similar arrangements at his properties worldwide. The whole network is coming down." Grace's legal status was secured through emergency court orders, with Catholic Charities taking temporary custody, while permanent arrangements were made. Sister Margaret coordinated a team of specialists to ensure she received every possible support for her development. "God's plans are mysterious," the nun told David, as they watched Grace play with her ever-present rabbit. "He put you in that house, gave you the heart to see what others ignored, the courage to act when others turned away. Through you, he didn't just save Grace. He exposed darkness to light." The hospital room became a kind of command center for their expanding mission. Dr. Santos collaborated with specialists developing protocols for identifying and helping other hidden children. Legal experts drafted legislation to prevent similar cases. Social workers created new guidelines for protecting vulnerable kids in wealthy families. But at the center of it all was Grace herself, blossoming like a flower finally given sunlight. Each day brought new achievements, stronger movements, clearer responses, more frequent smiles. The rabbit David had given her remained her constant companion, a symbol of the first kindness that had reached through her isolation. "Watch this," Maria said proudly one afternoon, setting Grace on a playmat. The baby pushed herself up, stronger than anyone had expected, reaching for a toy with perfect focus. She's showing everyone how wrong he was. Every move she makes proves his lies. The hospital staff had fallen in love with their special patient. Nurses fought for shifts in her wing, bringing small gifts and extra attention. Physical therapists celebrated every milestone. Even the typically stern head of pediatrics was seen making silly faces to earn Grace's giggles. This is what healing looks like, Dr. Santos observed. Not just for Grace, but for everyone she touches. She's teaching us all something about resilience, about the power of love over fear, acceptance over rejection. David often found himself sitting by Grace's crib late into the evening, homework spread across his lap, watching her sleep peacefully. The basement seemed like a distant nightmare now, but its lessons remained. Evil thrived in silence. Courage wore many faces, and sometimes the greatest acts of heroism began with simply refusing to look away. "You know," Chen told him during one of these quiet moments, "in Chinese tradition, we believe some children are born with old souls, sent to teach important lessons. Perhaps Grace's purpose was not just to be saved, but to help us save ourselves from the darkness of indifference." Outside the hospital windows, Boston continued its rhythms, but something had shifted in the city's conscience. The story of a wet baby in a basement, of invisible workers rising up, of a teenage boy choosing justice over safety, had awakened something powerful. It wasn't just about Grace anymore. It was about who we become when confronted with the choice between comfortable silence and costly truth. The truth about Wellington's empire unraveled like a poorly woven tapestry. Each day brought new revelations as investigators dug deeper into his carefully constructed world of lies. Preston Manor, once a symbol of wealth and power, became a crime scene where forensic accountants and federal agents worked side by side. "It's staggering," Detective Chen told David during one of her regular updates. "The basement wasn't just for Grace. We found evidence of other children, other inconveniences he'd hidden away over the years. Some were sent to that facility in Switzerland. Others just disappeared." The detectives' team had discovered a network of offshore accounts, each tied to what Wellington called his problem-solving fund. Millions of dollars spent on hiding unwanted children, silencing witnesses, and buying the cooperation of doctors willing to falsify records. "Your mother wasn't the only one he threatened with immigration problems," Chen explained, spreading documents across the hospital conference room table. "He made a practice of hiring undocumented workers, keeping their papers in limbo so he could control them. The perfect, invisible workforce." David thought of all the faces he'd seen in Preston Manor's corridors, all the downcast eyes and careful silences. How many? Hundreds over the years. But they're coming forward now. Your courage gave them courage. The staff's testimonies painted a picture of systematic abuse of power. Wellington had created a modern-day fiefdom, using people's vulnerabilities to build his strength. But in Grace, he had finally found an obstacle he couldn't simply make. Disappear? He didn't count on love, Rosa said simply, cradling Grace during one of her feeding times. All his money, all his power, and he never understood that love makes people stronger than fear. The media coverage shifted from sensation to substance. Investigative reporters dug into Wellington's past, finding a pattern of discarded children that stretched back decades. His first wife had vanished after giving birth to a child with autism. That child, now an adult, was found in a private institution in Sweden, his care paid for through anonymous accounts. "It was never about protecting them," Sister Margaret observed, reviewing the growing evidence. "It was about protecting his image. Every child who didn't meet his standards of perfection was a threat to his carefully constructed facade." The business world reeled as Wellington's corporate empire imploded. Companies he'd acquired through manipulation and fraud were revealed as houses of cards. The charitable foundation that had earned him such praise was exposed as a money laundering operation. He used philanthropy as camouflage, explained the ProPublica reporter who had helped break the story. Every donation, every public gesture of generosity was calculated to hide his true nature. He didn't help children to save them. He did it to bury his crimes in plain sight. But it was the testimony of Preston Manor's staff that proved most damaging. One by one, they came forward, sharing their observations, their suspicions, their small acts of resistance. The kitchen workers who tried to smuggle extra food to Grace, the maintenance staff who accidentally left doors unlocked, the housekeepers who documented everything in hidden diaries. "We were never as powerless as he thought," Chen said proudly. "We just needed someone to show us that standing together made us strong." David spent hours with the prosecution team, helping them understand the Manor's layout, the security patterns, the complex web of surveillance and silence that had kept Grace hidden. His detailed notes, originally made for the rescue, now served as evidence of premeditation and systematic abuse. Wellington's lawyers tried to paint him as a grieving widower overwhelmed by a difficult situation, but the evidence told a different story. Security footage recovered from his private servers showed him methodically planning Grace's imprisonment, discussing her disposal with cold precision. The most damaging evidence, Detective Chen revealed, was his own words. The recordings from his office, the emails to that Swiss facility, the conversations with corrupt doctors. He documented everything, probably to protect himself from betrayal. Instead, he built the case against himself. Grace's medical records told their own story. Dr. Santos and her team documented every sign of neglect, every missed developmental milestone, every indication of the damage Wellington had tried to inflict. But they also documented something else, Grace's extraordinary resilience. "Look at these readings," Dr. Santos showed David, pointing to neural response charts. Even in isolation, her brain was developing, adapting, fighting to connect. She never gave up, never stopped trying to reach out. That's why she responded so quickly to kindness when you found her. The hospital had become a kind of sanctuary where truth and healing intertwined. Grace's room, once filled with medical equipment, now overflowed with toys, books, and cards from well-wishers around the world. The rabbit David had given her sat in a place of honor, watching over her progress like a soft guardian angel. "Sometimes," Maria said, watching Grace master another physical therapy challenge, "the truth is like a seed. It only needs one person brave enough to plant it, to water it with courage, to protect it until it grows strong enough to break through concrete." Wellington's world of wealth and influence had been built on a foundation of lies. But in trying to bury his greatest shame, he had instead planted the seed of his own destruction. Grace, the child he had tried to hide, had become the light that exposed everything. The federal courthouse in Boston had never seen a crowd like this. Protesters filled the steps, holding signs demanding justice for Grace and all hidden children. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension as Wellington's trial reached its climactic moment. David sat in the front row, surrounded by his allies from Preston Manor. His mother held his hand tightly as they watched Wellington being led in, his expensive suit unable to hide how prison had diminished him. The billionaire's carefully crafted mask had crumbled during his months in custody, revealing the twisted soul beneath. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Miranda Rodriguez entered. She had earned a reputation for standing up to powerful defendants, and her selection for this case had sent Wellington's legal team into near panic. The prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. Security footage showed Wellington's methodical cruelty. Financial records revealed the complex web of payments used to hide Grace and others. Medical records documented the calculated neglect designed to suppress her development. But it was the human testimony that proved most devastating. One by one, Preston Manor's staff took the stand, their invisible status finally transformed into powerful voice. Rosa described the inadequate food portions, the missing supplies, the sound of Grace's cries echoing through the vents. He wanted her to fade away, she testified, her voice steady, to become as invisible as we were. Chen's testimony was clinical, devastating in its precision. He presented maintenance logs that were actually detailed surveillance records, documenting every instance of Wellington's visits to the basement, every conversation about Grace's planned disappearance. He thought no one was watching, Chen said simply, but we saw everything. When David took the stand, Wellington finally showed emotion, his face contorting with rage at the boy who had destroyed his empire. David's voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as he described discovering Grace, planning her rescue, gathering evidence. Why? The prosecutor asked. Why risk everything for someone you barely knew? David looked directly at Wellington. Because everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves to be loved. Grace wasn't a mistake or a problem to solve. She was a child reaching out for help. And I couldn't walk away like... He paused, thinking of his father, like some people do. The defense tried to paint Wellington as a grieving widower overwhelmed by difficult circumstances, but their carefully constructed narrative collapsed when the prosecution played Wellington's own words from his office recordings. The Swiss facility will handle the final arrangements, his voice echoed through the courtroom, cold and precise. Once she's across the border, she legally ceases to exist. The Foundation's image remains untainted. Wellington's mask finally shattered completely. He lunged to his feet, pointing at David. You little nobody, you think you understand anything about protecting a legacy? About maintaining standards? She was an embarrassment, a flaw in perfection. I built an empire. Mr. Wellington, Judge Rodriguez's voice cut like steel, you've said quite enough. The courtroom sat in stunned silence, Wellington's true nature finally exposed for all to see. His own lawyers seemed to shrink away from him as he continued to rant about legacy, about standards, about his right to eliminate imperfection. But the most powerful testimony came last. The prosecution had arranged for Grace to be brought in briefly, not to testify, but to demonstrate the truth of her existence. Dr. Santos carried her into the courtroom, and the transformation was undeniable. Grace, now thriving under proper care, radiated health and joy. She played peekaboo with the doctor, demonstrating the social skills Wellington had claimed she could never develop. When she spotted David, she reached for him with a happy squeal, showing none of the developmental delays her father had used to justify her imprisonment. Wellington's face went ashen, his carefully constructed lies about Grace's limitations, her supposed inability to connect or develop normally, crumbled in the face of this living, laughing proof. The defense's medical claims, Dr. Santos testified, were not just inaccurate. They were deliberately fabricated to support Mr. Wellington's attempts to erase his daughter's existence. Grace's current development proved she never had the limitations, he claimed. The only thing limiting her was his cruelty. Judge Rodriguez's verdict was unequivocal. In 30 years on the bench, she declared, I have never seen such calculated cruelty masked by such sophisticated pretense. Mr. Wellington didn't just fail as a father, he actively worked to destroy an innocent child's chance at life, all to maintain an image of perfection that was in itself a lie. The sentences were read out one by one: attempted murder, child endangerment, medical abuse, conspiracy, fraud, human trafficking, obstruction of justice. Multiple life terms to be served consecutively. Wellington's empire of lies had finally crumbled to dust. As Wellington was led away, still ranting about legacy and standards, Grace waved goodbye from Dr. Santos's arms, a final innocent gesture that demonstrated more humanity than her father had ever possessed. Outside the courthouse, spring rain had given way to sunshine. David stood with his mother, watching Wellington's last journey to prison. It's really over, he whispered. Maria squeezed his hand. No, mijo. For Grace, for all the hidden children. Finally being found, it's just beginning. She was right. The trial's end marked not just Wellington's downfall, but the start of a new chapter for everyone involved. Grace's story had opened doors, exposed shadows, and reminded the world that sometimes the greatest acts of justice start with simply seeing what others choose to ignore. 1 year after Wellington's conviction, Preston Manor had been transformed. The sprawling estate, seized by federal authorities, now housed the Grace Foundation, a sanctuary and advocacy center for children with special needs. The basement where Grace had been imprisoned was filled with sunlight and laughter, converted into a state-of-the-art therapy center. David, now a high school sophomore, spent his afternoons volunteering at the foundation. He watched as Grace, thriving in her new life, helped welcome other rescued children. Her story had sparked a nationwide investigation, leading to the discovery of dozens of similar cases among wealthy families. "She's like a little lighthouse," Sister Margaret observed, watching Grace guide a newly arrived child toward the therapy toys, drawing others out of darkness, showing them the way to healing. The foundation's success had exceeded everyone's expectations. Dr. Santos led a team of specialists developing new protocols for identifying and preventing cases of medical neglect. Chen, officially retired but still ever present, trained security staff to look for signs of abuse in wealthy households. "Money hides many sins," he would tell them, "but it cannot hide the truth forever. We must learn to see what others try to keep invisible." Rosa had been promoted to Director of Resident Services, ensuring every child received not just care, but love. The kitchen always smelled of her special recipes, bringing comfort to traumatized children who had never known simple kindnesses. "Food is love," she explained to new staff members. "Sometimes healing starts with a warm cookie and a gentle smile." Maria, now the Foundation's family outreach coordinator, worked with immigrant parents afraid to report abuse for fear of deportation. Her own story of courage and legal triumph became a beacon of hope for others trapped between justice and survival. "No one should have to choose between safety and silence," she would say. "Every child deserves a voice, and every parent deserves the chance to protect their children without fear." The manor's grounds had been redesigned to accommodate children with various disabilities. Where Wellington's manicured lawns once displayed his wealth, accessible playgrounds and sensory gardens now encouraged exploration and growth. Grace's favorite spot was the butterfly garden, where she would spend hours watching the delicate creatures emerge from their chrysalises. "It's perfect symbolism," Ms. Martinez told her sister during a foundation fundraiser. "These children, like butterflies, just needed the right environment to spread their wings." The reporter smiled, recording another success story for her ongoing series about the Foundation's work. The media attention had shifted from scandal to inspiration, highlighting the positive changes emerging from Wellington's darkness. David's role had evolved, too. Other teenagers, inspired by his courage, formed a youth advocacy network. They called themselves Grace's Guardians, working to raise awareness about hidden abuse and support for children with disabilities. "You showed us that age doesn't matter when it comes to doing what's right," a freshman told him during a training session, "that sometimes the youngest voices speak the loudest truths." The Foundation's influence spread beyond Boston. Similar centers opened in other cities, each adopting the model of combining medical care with emotional healing. The basement's transformation became a powerful metaphor. Darkness converted to light, imprisonment transformed into liberation. Grace, now approaching her 3rd birthday, had surpassed every developmental milestone her father had claimed she could never reach. She spoke in short sentences, played complex games, and showed particular talent for music. The rabbit David had given her remained her constant companion, though now it shared space with many other toys. "She's teaching us all the time," Dr. Santos told a medical conference. "Teaching us about resilience, about the human spirit's capacity to overcome trauma, about the healing power of unconditional love." The Preston Manor staff, who had helped rescue Grace, remained closely connected to the Foundation. They formed a unique family bound together by their shared act of courage. Weekly dinners in the Manor's kitchen became a tradition, with Rosa's cooking and Chen's quiet wisdom creating a space where healing touched everyone. "Look at this place now," Tony mused during one such gathering. From a house of secrets to a home of hope, who would have thought? David watched Grace playing with other children, her laughter echoing through halls that had once held her cries. The transformation went beyond the physical changes to the building. It represented a fundamental shift in how society viewed its most vulnerable members. "Sometime," he told a documentary crew filming the Foundation's work, "the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of courage. One person seeing what others ignore, one voice speaking when others stay silent." The Foundation had become more than just a refuge. It was a movement. Each child who found healing there became part of a larger story about transformation and justice. The invisible had become impossible to ignore, and the powerless had found their strength. As sunset painted the Manor's windows gold, David sat, with Grace in her favorite garden spot. She was teaching him a clapping game, her coordination perfect, her joy infectious. Above them, butterflies danced in the evening light, free and beautiful like the children they represented. "Brother David," she called him now, one of the many words Wellington had claimed she'd never speak. "Look, wings!" He watched her point to a newly emerged butterfly drying its wings on a flower stem, ready for its first flight. Like Grace, like all the children finding their way to freedom, it just needed the right moment, the right support to soar. The ripples from Grace's story touched corners of society that Wellington had never imagined. 2 years after her rescue, David stood before a congressional committee, his voice steady as he testified about the need for stronger protections for vulnerable children and whistleblowers. "Power doesn't just corrupt," he told the assembled legislators. "It creates shadows where cruelty can hide. But those shadows only exist because we allow them to, because we look away from what we don't want to see." The Grace's Law package moved swiftly through both houses with rare bipartisan support. It mandated independent medical oversight for wealthy families' private health care arrangements, created protections for immigrant workers reporting abuse, and established a special task force for investigating cases of hidden children. This legislation isn't just about preventing future abuse, Senator Martinez, no relation to David's counselor, announced during the signing ceremony. It's about transforming how we view society's obligations to its most vulnerable members. The international impact proved even more profound. The Swiss facility Wellington had planned to use was exposed as part of a global network catering to wealthy families wanting to hide problematic children. Investigations spread across continents, leading to dozens of rescues and arrests. Grace was just the beginning, Detective Chen told a UN panel on human rights. She showed us where to look, what signs to watch for. Now we're finding these cases everywhere, in every country where wealth can buy silence. The medical community underwent its own revolution. Dr. Santos's protocols for identifying and preventing medical abuse became standard practice in pediatric care. Hospitals worldwide adopted new screening procedures specifically designed to catch cases where wealth might be used to mask neglect. The Wellington warning signs are now part of every medical student's training, she explained during a global health conference. We're teaching a new generation of doctors that wealth doesn't exempt anyone from scrutiny when a child's welfare is at stake. The Grace Foundation expanded beyond Boston, opening centers across the country. Each new location followed the original model, converting symbols of wealth and power into sanctuaries of healing. Empty mansions, private islands, and corporate retreats were transformed into spaces of hope and recovery. David's youth advocacy network grew into an international movement. Teenagers around the world formed chapters of Grace's Guardians, using social media and technology to spotlight cases of abuse and advocate for change. Their motto, "See the invisible, speak the truth," became a rallying cry for young activists. What David taught us, a teenage activist in London explained, is that youth doesn't equal powerlessness. Sometimes being young means seeing truth more clearly because we haven't learned to look away. The Preston Manor staff's story inspired labor movements globally. Their example of collective resistance against powerful abuse became a model for worker solidarity. Union organizers used their testimony to highlight the crucial role service workers play in exposing institutional corruption. "The invisible ones see everything," Rosa told a labor rights conference. "We clean their rooms, prepare their food, maintain their secrets, but we also carry the power to expose truth when conscience demands it." Educational institutions revised their curricula to include disability rights and corporate accountability. The Wellington case became a standard study in law schools, medical schools, and business ethics programs. Students learned not just about the crimes, but about the systemic changes needed to prevent their recurrence. "We're teaching the next generation," Ms. Martinez explained to an educators forum, "that true success isn't measured by wealth or power, but by how we treat those who need our protection most." Even the business world felt the impact. Corporate boards faced new scrutiny over their executives' private lives and family relationships. The Wellington audit became standard practice. Independent reviews specifically looking for signs that corporate power was being used to hide personal abuse. Media coverage evolved from sensation to substance. Investigative journalists developed new techniques for penetrating the shields of wealth and privilege, inspired by how Grace's story had exposed the vulnerable spaces in seemingly impenetrable power structures. Wellington's greatest fear was imperfection, a Pulitzer-winning analysis observed. In trying to hide what he saw as flaws, he revealed the deep imperfection in our society's worship of power and privilege. The art world responded too. Grace's story inspired paintings, sculptures, and performances exploring themes of visibility, voice, and transformation. A stunning installation at the Museum of Modern Art featured thousands of paper butterflies, each carrying the name of a rescued child. But perhaps the most profound change was in how society viewed disability itself. Grace's thriving development challenged deep-seated prejudices about potential and worth. Her joy, her achievements, her simple presence proved Wellington's standards of perfection were themselves deeply flawed. "Every child is a unique miracle," Sister Margaret told a gathering of parents at the foundation. Grace taught us that what some see as imperfection is often just a different kind of perfect, waiting to be recognized and cherished. As another sunset painted the foundation's butterfly garden in gold, David watched Grace leading a new arrival on a tour of her favorite spots. The younger child, recently rescued from a similar situation of wealthy neglect, held Grace's hand like a lifeline. "See?" Grace said, pointing to a chrysalis. "Change coming. Good change." Her simple words captured everything. Their movement had become a promise that transformation was possible, that darkness could become light, that every hidden child could find their way to freedom and joy. 5 years to the day after Grace's rescue, Preston Manor's gates opened wide for a special celebration. The sprawling estate, once a monument to wealth and power, had bloomed into a living symbol of transformation. Hundreds gathered on the sunlit grounds, rescued children and their families, advocates, workers, healers, all united by a story that had changed their lives. David, now preparing for college with plans to study child advocacy law, stood at the podium beside the butterfly garden. At 20, he carried himself with quiet confidence, though his voice still held the same gentle strength that had first given him courage to act. 5 years ago, he began, in the basement beneath our feet, a little girl waited in darkness. She didn't know then that she would change the world. She only knew how to do one thing: reach out for love, again and again, no matter how many times that love was denied. Grace sat in the front row between Maria and Sister Margaret, no longer the imprisoned infant, but a thriving 6-year-old. Her worn stuffed rabbit, the first gift of kindness she'd received, still accompanied her everywhere. She beamed at David, understanding more than anyone expected about her role in their shared story. But Grace wasn't the only one reaching out. David continued. Every person here played a part in this miracle. The workers who refused to stay invisible, the advocates who wouldn't be silenced, the healers who saw possibility where others saw limitation. Together, we proved that love is stronger than power, that truth can overcome any darkness. The audience included faces from every chapter of their journey. Chen, older but still sharp-eyed, sat with his grandchildren who now volunteered at the foundation. Rosa had brought her famous cookies, the recipe officially renamed Grace's Comfort Cookies by popular demand. Dr. Santos had flown in from Geneva, where she was implementing worldwide standards for protecting vulnerable children. Detective Chen, now heading the FBI's special unit for investigating wealth-enabled abuse, sat beside the prosecutor who had brought Wellington down. Their work continued, inspired by Grace's case, finding and freeing other hidden children across the country. Wellington thought wealth could hide anything, David said, his voice carrying across the hushed grounds. He believed in a perfect world where inconvenient truths could be locked away. But he never understood that perfection isn't about hiding flaws. It's about embracing our complete humanity with all its beautiful variations. Grace stood then, making her way to the podium with the confident steps of a child who had never let others' limitations define her. She carried a butterfly release box, specially designed for her small hands. Inside, newly emerged monarchs waited to take flight. Sometimes, David continued, helping Grace position the box, transformation looks impossible. A caterpillar doesn't know it will fly. A locked-away child doesn't know she will dance. A teenage boy cleaning floors doesn't know he can change the world. But with love, with courage, with the simple choice to see and act, anything is possible. Grace opened the box. Butterflies rose into the summer air, their wings catching sunlight, their freedom a living metaphor for everything the foundation represented. The crowd watched in reverent silence as the last butterfly found its way to the garden Grace had helped plant. "Brother David," Grace said clearly into the microphone, her speech far exceeding what Wellington had claimed possible. "Tell about the rabbit?" David smiled, remembering that first small act of defiance, a stuffed toy smuggled to a lonely child. "Sometimes," he told the crowd, "the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. A toy given in kindness, a truth refused to be ignored, a simple decision to care about someone else's child." Maria wiped tears from her eyes as she joined them at the podium. Their family had grown beyond blood, bound together by choices made in darkness that had led them all to light. The foundation's success had secured their future, allowing Maria to become a full-time advocate for immigrant families facing similar struggles. 5 years ago, she said, hugging both David and Grace, we were invisible people, afraid to speak, afraid to act. Today we stand in the sun, surrounded by the miracle of what happens when love overcomes fear. The celebration continued into evening, the manor's grounds twinkling with lights that transformed the once forbidding estate into a fairy tale scene. Children played on equipment specially designed for all abilities, their laughter healing the last echoes of Wellington's cruelty. As sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, David found a quiet moment in the butterfly garden. Grace was teaching younger children her favorite clapping game, her joy infectious, her spirit unbound. The worn rabbit watched from its perch on a nearby bench, a silent witness to how far they'd come. "You know what Mama says?" Grace asked, joining him with her ever-present wisdom. "She says some angels don't have wings. They have cleaning carts and courage instead." David hugged her close, remembering the frightened boy who had first heard her cries, the invisible workers who had become heroes, the power of simple choices to change countless lives. "And some angels," he whispered, watching another butterfly emerge from its chrysalis, "come to us as perfect little girls that nobody thought could fly." The garden bloomed around them, filled with flowers planted by rescued children, tended by healing hands, nourished by transformed hearts. Where Wellington had tried to hide imperfection, beauty now flourished in all its diverse forms. The invisible had become undeniable, the voiceless had found their song, and love had proven stronger than any power wealth could buy. Type, believe. In the comments if you know that every child deserves to be seen, to be heard, to be loved for exactly who they are.